So this PowerPoint covers all of middle and late childhood. So approximately 5 or 6 to about 11 or 12 is the age range here. So this will go through physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional development. Most of the slides have some kind of sound or speaker that's associated with it. There might be a few slides along the way that do not have that. Girls and boys grow about 2 to 3 inches and gain about 7 pounds per year until puberty. Skeletal bones and muscles broaden and lengthen, which may cause children and adolescents to experience growing pains. Skeletal growth in middle childhood is also associated with losing teeth or baby teeth. Throughout most of middle childhood, girls are smaller than boys and have less muscle mass. As girls enter puberty, however, they may be considerably larger than boys of the same age, who enter puberty a few years later. Once boys begin sexually maturing, their height and weight eventually surpass the heights and weights of girls of the same age. Brain and nervous system developments continue during middle childhood. Their more complex behavioral and cognitive abilities becomes possible as the central nervous system matures. Early in middle childhood, a growth spurt occurs in the brain so that by age 8 or 9, the organ is nearly adult size. Brain development during middle childhood is characterized by growth of specific structures, especially the frontal lobes. These lobes, located in the front of the brain just under the skull, are responsible for planning, reasoning, social judgment, and ethical decision-making, among other functions. Damage to this part of the brain results in erratic emotional outbursts, inability to plan, and poor judgment. The most anterior, which is the front portion of the frontal lobes, is the prefrontal cortex, which appears to be responsible for personality. As the size of the frontal lobe increases, children are able to engage in increasingly difficult cognitive tasks, such as performing a series of tasks in a reasonable order. An example is assembling a mechanical toy, unpacking the pieces, connecting the parts, making the model move by adding a power source. These are a series of tasks that must be completed in the correct order to achieve certain results. So if you think of Legos for this, well, that would be a task in order. Lateralization of the 2 hemispheres of the brain also continues during middle childhood, as does maturation of the corpus callosum. The other areas of the nervous system as well. Interestingly, children achieve concrete operations around age 7 when the brain and the nervous system have developed a certain amount of neural connections. When these neural connections have developed, a child's ability to perceive and think about the world advances from an egocentric, magical viewpoint to a more concrete and systematic way of thinking. Motor skills are behavioral abilities or capacities. Gross motor skills involve the use of large body movements, and fine motor skills involve the use of small body movements. Both gross and fine motor skills continue to redefine during middle childhood. Children love to run, jump, leap, throw, catch, climb, and balance. Children play baseball, they ride bikes, roller skate, they take karate lessons, ballet lessons, participate in gymnastics. As school-age children grow physically, they become faster, stronger, and better coordinated. Consequently, during middle childhood, children become more adept at gross motor activities. Children enjoy using their hands in detailed ways too. From early in preschool, children learn and practice fine motor skills. Preschool children cut, paste, mold, shape, draw, paint, create, and write. These children also learn skills such as tying shoelaces, untying knots, and flossing their teeth. Some fortunate children are able to take music lessons for piano, violin, flute, or other instruments. Learning to play an instrument helps children to further develop their fine motor skills. Along with the physical growth of children comes the development of fine motor skills, including the sense of competence and confidence to use these skills. Exercise is an important part of this stage of development. Obesity, or being 20% or more above one's ideal weight is a special health problem that occurs during school years. About 25% of school-age children in the US today are obese, and the majority of these children go on to become obese adults. Obesity in adulthood is related to heart problems, high blood pressure, and diabetes. Although obese children are not the same medical risks as obese adults, these children should master effective eating and exercise habits as early as possible to decrease the risk of later obesity and health-related problems. The majority of disabilities and deaths in middle childhood are the result of injuries from accidents. In the United States, nearly 22 million children are hurt in accidents each year. For children, the most common deadly accidents result from being struck by moving vehicles. Accidents may occur at near and away from home, therefore adequate adult supervision is always important. Injuries occurring at school are usually the result of a playground and sports-related accident. Consequently, children should always wear protective headgear and other safety gear when playing sports and riding bikes. Other causes of death in middle childhood include cancer, congenital defects, homicide, and deadly infections. Middle childhood tends to be a very healthy period of life in Western societies. The typical minor illnesses of early childhood include coughs, colds, and stomach aches. They're likely to lessen in frequency in middle childhood. The improved resistance to common illness is probably due to a combination of increased immunity from previous exposures and improved hygiene and nutritional practices. Minor illnesses occur, but most illnesses do not require medical attention. Minor illnesses may help children learn psychological coping skills and strategies for dealing with physical discomforts. Major illnesses for school-age children or younger children can be influenza, pneumonia, cancer, which you see here on the slide, HIV, or AIDS. These are some of the disabilities that children might receive special services for. An IEP, which stands for Individualized Education Plan, would offer additional help to these students suffering from these different disabilities. In addition, on the next slide, you'll see things about ADHD and autism. Both of these are growing concerns. We have different classes that we can put kids in as needed. Otherwise, we try and keep them in the least restricted environment. So we will try and keep students in a general ed class and make additional accommodations, such as adding a teacher assistant so students can stay with, the general population of their peers. ADHD is not typically identified until children are in the first or second grade. Everyday behavior of preschool children is for them to be hyperactive. It's in their own right that the behavior does not necessarily draw attention to children who have the disorder. We do not have sufficient observational basis for identifying ADHD early on. Most of the symptoms of ADHD typically become troublesome when children engage in structured activities. Prior to entering the school system, the impulsivity and attention deficits are not problematic, that most activities are unstructured. Identification of this abnormality depends heavily on careful identification of normal behavior patterns among children. Most parents do not have the experience to differentiate typical playfulness in young children from atypical behavior. Consider the possibility that hyperactivity is less of a problem of too many behaviors and more of a problem of too much disorganized behavior. In the 70s, researchers made systematic comparative observations of normal children, hyperactive children, and hyperactive children being treated with Ritalin. They found that those receiving Ritalin did not slow down, but rather became more organized in their play. This finding called into question the notion that Ritalin, which is a stimulant, has a truly paradoxical effect or tranquilizing effect, and gave more support to the idea that the drug acts on brain processes that monitor and organize behavior. There are things that we can do to try and identify or when a child has ADHD. Parents need to observe their child in a variety of settings and note fluctuations in behavior in response to varying demands in different situations. Teachers can use various rating scales to facilitate their observations of the child's behavior on a daily basis. These scales are also provide a normative comparison relative to other children's behavior in the same setting. The normative perspective is important for comparisons of children of the same age and setting expectations. There's systematic observations in play in school settings that help experts quantify time spent off task and provide information on the child's functioning. These are important observations of current behavior, given that parent and teacher observations may be biased or confounded by past behavior. And then there's a sociometric assessment, which can highlight peer popularity, rejection, social loneliness, and social anxiety, which may influence children's behaviors. When I was doing my bachelor's, I spent a lot of time in IEP meetings, and I always tell parents, bring somebody with. I've seen some schools that are absolutely wonderful when they meet with parents to go over the IEP each year, but I've seen other schools that kind of almost bully the parent into agreeing with what the school thinks. What happens here is, you have all these specialists that you saw on the previous page that might be working with your child. So it could be like the nurse, the social worker, the physical therapist, the speech therapist, maybe there's a teacher aide, and the teacher, of course. And you have all these people that have already talked and they're all in agreement and on the same page. Well, then you as the parent come in, especially if you're alone, and you have your own ideas of what your child needs because you think, the school isn't doing enough, or maybe that, you can drop some services. But all of these people are in agreement and you're kind of sitting alone. It can be very intimidating for parents. So I always say, bring somebody with you. Even if you're a single parent, bring a friend, bring a family member, just bring somebody so that you have that support and you're not alone. Like I said, most schools, they're okay and they work well with the parent, but I have seen some situations where, they kind of force the parent's hand and make the parent feel like a bad parent because they're not agreeing with the school. Of the school of experts, but you're the parent, so you are the expert of your child. The speech therapist or social worker who spends a half hour with your child once or twice a week does not know your child the way you know your child. So don't hesitate to speak up and make sure your child gets the services that they need. According to Piaget, the child is entering a new stage of cognitive development where they are improving their logical skills. During middle childhood, children also make improvements in short-term and long-term memory. According to Piaget, children in early childhood are in the pre-operational stage of development, in which they learn to think symbolically about the world. From ages 7 to 11, the school-age child continues to develop what Piaget referred to as the concrete operational stage of cognitive development. This involves mastering the use of logic in concrete ways. The child can use logic to solve problems tied to their own direct experience, but has trouble solving hypothetical problems or considering more abstract problems. The child uses inductive reasoning, which means thinking that the world reflects one's own personal experience. For example, a child has one friend who's rude and another one who is also rude, and the same is true for a third friend. Using inductive reasoning, the child may conclude that friends are rude. We will see that this way of thinking tends to change during adolescence as children begin to use deductive reasoning effectively. The word concrete refers to that which is tangible, that which can be seen or untouched or experienced directly. The concrete operational child is able to make use of logical principles in solving problems involving the physical world. For example, the child can understand the principles of cause and effect, size, and distance. As children's experiences and vocabularies grow, they build schemas and are able to classify objects in many different ways. Classification can include new ways of arranging information, categorizing information, or creating classes of information. Many psychological theorists, including Piaget, believe that classification involves a hierarchical structure such as that information is organized from very broad categories to very specific items. One type of memory called verbatim is just like it sounds. It's very detailed and accurate representation of something experienced or learned in the past. For example, I can still perfectly recall several poems that I memorized decades ago, word for word or verbatim. On the other hand, we also have gist memories. These are memories that are heavily based on context. We don't remember these things verbatim. Instead, we tend to build these memories out of small pieces of memory and knowledge. Almost everyone has both types of memories, but different people tend to be stronger at different types. Both types can create false memories in different ways. I know from my own experience that I have a very good gist of memory, as I can often reassemble past events or ideas pretty accurately, even though I might not have a verbatim memory of that event or idea. My verbatim memory, on the other hand, is not as strong as my gist, but I'm still able to remember a lot of things in detail and step by step as they happened. Information processing theory is a classic theory of memory that compares the way in which the mind works to computer storing, processing, and retrieving information. According to the theory, there's 3 levels of memory: sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory is the information that enters our sensory memory first. Things that you smell, such as soup on the stove, brownies in the oven. You may not have registered those sensations, but they are continuously coming into our brains. So even though we're not necessarily aware that we're smelling these things, any sense around us just automatically come into our brains without a thought process, almost like an automatic. They're lost after a few seconds. So sensory memory only lasts like a fraction of a second to a few seconds at most. They're immediately filtered out as irrelevant. Working memory, this is usually more meaningful. It helps us to remember things for exams that we take. It moves from sensory memory into working memory, things that we take in. The process by which this happens is not entirely clear. Working memory consists of information that we are immediately consciously aware of. All the things on your mind at this moment are part of your working memory. There is a limited amount of information that can be kept in working memory. For most people, this is somewhere around 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information. This is also called chunking theory. And so that's the amount of information we can remember at one time. So things that fit into this 7 plus or minus 2 theory is like your bank account number, your social security number. That all, we remember things in chunks and we're able to hold on to that information better. Rehearsal can help maintain information in working memory, but the process by which information moves from working memory into long-term memory seems to rely on more than simple rehearsal. Information in our working memory must be stored in an effective way in order to be accessible for us to use later. It's stored in our long-term memory or knowledge base. Long-term memory, this level of memory has an unlimited capacity and stores information for days, months, or years. It consists of things that we know or things that we can remember if we're asked. This is where you want the information to ultimately be stored. The important thing to remember about storage is that it must be done in a meaningful or effective way. In other words, if you simply try to repeat something several times in order to remember it, you may only be able to remember the sound of the word rather than the meaning of the concept. So if you're asked to explain the meaning of the word or to apply a concept in some way, you will be lost. Studying involves organizing information in a meaningful way for later retrieval. Passively reading a text is usually inadequate and should be thought of as the first step in learning material. Writing key words, thinking of examples to illustrate their meaning, and considering ways that concepts are related are all techniques helpful for organizing information for effective storage and later retrieval. During middle childhood, children are able to learn and remember due to an improvement in the ways they attend to and store information. As children enter school and learn more about the world, they develop more categories for concepts and learn more efficient strategies for storing and retrieving information. One significant reason is that they continue to have more experiences on which to tie new information. New experiences are similar to old ones or remind the child of something else about which they know. This helps them file away new experiences more easily. Children in middle childhood also have a better understanding of how well they're performing on a task and the level of difficulty of a task. As they become more realistic about their abilities, they can adapt studying strategies to meet those needs. While preschoolers may spend as much time on an unimportant aspect of a problem they do on the main point, school-age children start to learn to prioritize and gauge what is significant and what is not. They develop metacognition, or the ability to understand the best way to figure out a problem. They gain more tools and strategies that help them to hold on to the information and be able to retrieve it at a later date. Critical thinking refers the ability to exercise careful evaluation or judgment in order to determine the authenticity, accuracy, worth, validity, or value of something. In addition to precise objective analysis, critical thinking involves evaluation, reflection, and reconstruction. And rather than strictly breaking down the information, critical thinking explores other elements that could have an influence on conclusions. Creative thinking refers to the ability to conceive new and innovative ideas by breaking from established thoughts, theories, rules, and procedures. It involves putting things together in new and imaginative ways. Creative thinking is often referred to as thinking outside of the box. Divergent thinking refers to the ability to generate creative ideas by exploring many possible solutions in an effort to find one that works. It involves bringing facts and data together from various sources and then applying logic and knowledge to solve problems or make decisions. It starts from a common point and moves outward in diverging directions to involve a variety of aspects or perspectives. Convergent thinking refers to the ability to put a number of different pieces or perspectives of a topic together in some kind of organized, logical manner to find a single answer. It involves focusing on a finite number of solutions rather than proposing multiple solutions. And then a little bit on abstract thinking too, in addition to this slide. This refers to the ability to use concepts to make and understand generalizations, then relating or connecting them to others, items, events, or experiences. It involves paying attention to the hidden meanings, thus allowing you to observe and understand theories and possibilities. Holistic or nonlinear thinking refers to the ability to see the big picture and recognize the interconnectedness of various components that form the larger system. This involves expanding your thought process in multiple directions rather just in one direction, and understanding a system by sensing its patterns. One more type is sequential or linear thinking, so opposite of holistic. This refers to the ability to process information in an orderly, prescribed manner. It involves a step-by-step progression where a response to a step must be obtained before another step is taken. The Stanford-Binet test is an examination meant to gauge intelligence through 5 factors of cognitive ability. These 5 factors include fluid reasoning, knowledge, quantitative reasoning, visual spatial processing, and working memory. Both verbal and nonverbal responses are measured. Each of the 5 factors is given a weight, and the combined score is often reduced to a ratio known commonly as the IQ. The Stanford-Binet test is among the most reliable standardized tests currently used in education. It has undergone many validity tests and revisions throughout its century-long history, and while there are undoubtedly a few issues with the assessment, most results are treated as accurate. Individuals with high scores are usually gifted, and those with low Stanford-Binet test scores often face some sort of cognitive disability. The Stanford-Binet test traces its roots to the Binet-Simon scale, French device for identifying levels of intelligence. The Binet-Simon scale was developed by Alfred Binet and his student Theodore Simon. French education laws were in flux at the time, and Binet was approached by a governmental commission. The commission wanted a device to detect children that possessed notably below average levels of intelligence for their age. That is how this whole standardized testing got started. The next few slides goes through Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. This is a quote from Howard Gardner. "I want my children to understand the world, but not just because the world is fascinating and the human mind is curious. I want them to understand it so that they will be positioned to make it a better place. Knowledge is not the same as morality, but we need to understand it if we're to avoid past mistakes and move in productive directions. An important part of that understanding is knowing who we are and what we can do. Ultimately, we must synthesize our understandings for ourselves. The performance of understanding that things matter are the ones we carry out as human beings in an imperfect world, which we can affect for good or for ill." Howard Gardner created these because he thinks that we should not just measure intelligence by whether you're good at math or you're good at writing, something like that, but there's a wide array of types of intelligences that we can focus on and try and encourage and build people up. He thinks that we teach a mile wide and only an inch deep. He feels that we should cut out some of our topics or subjects that we teach in school, and that more of these can be covered in college classes. So he has kind of a unique perspective on how we should approach this. So on this slide, you can see there's different careers that are associated with each type of intelligence. And then, like I said, the next few slides break down the intelligence and give a little bit more detail on them. The average intelligence is 100 of an IQ. Gifted is 130 and above, and then some type of intellectual disability would be 70 and below. We have out here in our district in U46 broken down into types of classrooms based on IQ. So those that are in 60 to 70 range of an IQ would be in what's called an MLP, a modified learning program. And so these are students that are still learning, just learning at maybe a lower rate or slower rate. So you might have a fifth grader that's still doing like second or third grade math, or reading at a third grade level instead of a fifth grade level. So they can still, learn, but they just learn at a lower rate or lower and slower speed. And then we have EN1 and EN2, and I can't remember which group is which, but they're broken down into like an IQ of 59 to about 35, and then 0 to 35. So in that higher of the two brackets, we tend to see kids with Down syndrome, cerebral palsy. That's very common at that group. Autism, some autism would fall into that. And then students that would be at the lowest from 0 to 35, there was one classroom I was in. There was 8 children, 7 of them were in wheelchairs. One of the girls was deaf, blind, and mute. So there's, you would think, well, what can we do in terms of school for these types of children? But they still have IEPs and goals that they're trying to meet. So, for somebody like that, one of her goals was to try and hold on to a toy for longer than 30 seconds. And so her muscle tone was very poor. A lot of these kids, you can't just leave them in the wheelchair for the day. So they might put them in like a ball pit, or some of the classrooms have like a large swing. There's like a stander, so you can take them from the wheelchair and put them in the stander. Some of them have a bike where you can put the kid on the bike and then push the bike down the hallway, and that helps to exercise their joints and their legs. So there's many things that we can do to, just try and improve the gross motor skills, or sometimes fine motor skills, in these types of kids. One thing I was surprised in, I was in a fourth or fifth grade elementary school gifted class. There are a lot of emotional disorders in these kids. It can be very challenging for them to relate to their peers. If there's such a small bracket of kids that have a high intelligence over 130, and most of your peers are just of average intelligence, it can be hard to relate to people. So they sometimes struggle emotionally, which is not something I would have thought of walking into a gifted classroom. A recent study revealed that in children characterized as being emotionally reactive, good perspective-taking skills were linked to being able to regain a neutral emotional state after being emotionally aroused. In middle and late childhood, children also become more skeptical of others' claims. High self-esteem and a positive self-concept are important characteristics of children's well-being. Children with high self-esteem are more likely to be securely attached to parents and have parents who engage in sensitive caregiving. Self-esteem reflects perceptions that do not always match reality. High self-esteem may refer to accurate, justified perceptions of one's worth as a person and one's successes and accomplishments, but it can also refer to an arrogant, grandiose, unwarranted sense of superiority over others. There are only moderate correlations between school performance and self-esteem, and these correlations do not suggest that high self-esteem produces better school performance. Efforts to increase students' self-esteem have not always led to improved school performances. The child brings a database for memories to all social situations. The database includes memories, acquired rules, social schemas, and social knowledge that the child has gained from his or her experiences. The memories include past interactions with peers and adults. The rules for behavior are acquired from other children, adults, or created upon reflection of social interactions. Social schemas are memory structures that organize information that are created through self-reflection of events. Social knowledge is the collection of memories for specific events, rules, and schemas. Oops. Lawrence Kohlberg expanded on the earlier work of cognitive theorist Piaget to explain the moral development of children, which he believed followed a series of stages. Kohlberg defined 3 levels of moral development: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional, and each level has 2 distinct stages. During the pre-conventional level, a child's sense of morality is externally controlled. Children accept and believe the rules of authority figures such as parents, teachers, and they judge an action based on its consequences. During the conventional level, an individual's sense of morality is tied to personal and societal relationships. Children continue to accept the rules of authority figures, but this is now because they believe that this is necessary to ensure positive relationships and societal order. During the post-conventional level, a person's sense of morality is defined in terms of more abstract principles and values. People now believe that some laws are unjust and should be changed or eliminated. Kohlberg's theory has been criticized for its cultural and gendered bias towards white, upper-class men and boys. It also fails to account for inconsistencies within moral judgments. He created this Heinz dilemma and gave it to boys aged 10 to 16 to assess their level of morality. The Heinz story, I'm sure you've heard this before, is when the guy's wife is dying and there's a drug that'll save her. The guy only has $1,000 and the pharmacist is saying, no, it's $2,000. And the pharmacist refuses to sell the drug for $1,000 or work out a payment plan. And so the guy breaks into the pharmacy, steals the drug to save his wife. You know, is he right or wrong? And so Kohlberg emphasized that the way an individual reasons about a dilemma determines positive moral development, whether it's positive moral development. After presenting people with various moral dilemmas, he reviewed people's responses and placed them in different stages of moral reasoning. According to Kohlberg, an individual progresses from the capacity for pre-conventional morality before age 9 to the capacity for conventional morality early adolescence and toward attaining post-conventional morality, which is only a few that fully achieve this. And then each level of morality contains 2 stages which provide the basis for the moral development in various contexts. Level 1, pre-conventional. Stage 1 is obedience and punishment. Stage 1 focuses on the child's desire to obey rules and avoid being punished. For example, an action is perceived as morally wrong because the perpetrator is punished. The worse the punishment for the act, the more bad the act is perceived to be. Stage 2, instrumental orientation, expresses what's in it for me. The individual believes or acts based on what they believe is their best interest. Stage 2 reasoning shows a limited interest in the needs of others, only to the point where it might further the individual's own interests. As a result, concern for others is not based on loyalty or intrinsic respect, but rather you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours mentality. An example would be a child is asked by his parents to do a chore. The child asks, what's in it for me? And the parents offer the child an incentive by giving him an allowance. Level 2, the conventional level, has stage 3, which is good boy, nice girl orientation. In stage 3, children want the approval of others and act in ways to avoid disapproval. Emphasis is placed on good behavior and people being nice to others. Stage 4, which is law and order orientation, the child blindly accepts rules and convention because of their importance in maintaining a functioning society. Rules are seen as being the same for everyone, and obeying rules by doing what one is supposed to do is seen as valuable and important. Moral reasoning in stage 4 is beyond the need for individual approval, exhibited in stage 3. If one person violates a law, perhaps everyone would. Thus, there's an obligation and a duty to uphold laws and rules. Most active members of society remain at stage 4, where morality is still predominantly dictated by an outside force. Level 3, which is the post-conventional, has the last 2 stages here. People now believe in the post-conventional that some laws are unjust and should be changed or eliminated. This level is marked by a growing realization that individuals are separate entities from society and that individuals may disobey rules inconsistent with their own principles. Post-conventional moralists live by their own ethical principles. These principles typically include such basic human rights as life, liberty, and justice, and view the rules as useful but changeable mechanisms rather than absolute dictates that must be obeyed without question. Because post-conventional individuals elevate their own moral evaluation of a situation over social conventions, their behavior, especially at stage 6, can sometimes be confused with that of those at the pre-conventional level. Some theorists have speculated that many people never reach this level of abstract moral reasoning. So stage 5, which is social contract orientation, the world is viewed as holding different opinions, rights, and values. Such perspectives should be mutually respected as unique to each person or community. Laws are regarded as social contracts rather than rigid edicts. Those that do not promote the general welfare should be changed when necessary to meet the greatest good for the greatest number of people. This is achieved through majority decision and inevitable compromise. Democratic government is theoretically based on stage 5 reasoning. Stage 6, universal ethical principle orientation. This moral reasoning is based on abstract reasoning using universal ethical principles. Generally, the chosen principles are abstract rather than concrete and focus on ideas such as equality, dignity, or respect. Laws are valid only insofar as they are grounded in justice, and a commitment to justice carries with it an obligation to disobey unjust laws. People choose the ethical principles they want to follow, and if they violate those principles, they feel guilty. In this way, the individual acts because it's morally right to do so, not because he or she wants to avoid punishment. It is in their best interest, it is expected, it is legal, or it is previously agreed upon. Although Kohlberg insisted that stage 6 exists, he found it difficult to identify individuals who consistently operated at that level. A few criticisms or critiques of Kohlberg. Kohlberg has been criticized for his assertion that women seem to be deficient in their moral reasoning abilities when compared to men. Carol Gilligan in 1982, she was a research assistant of Kohlberg. She criticized her former mentor's theory because it was based so narrowly on using white upper-class men and boys. She argued that women are not deficient in their moral reasoning and instead proposed that males and females reason differently. Girls and women focus more on staying connected and maintaining interpersonal relationships. His theory has also been criticized for emphasizing justice to the exclusion of other values, with the result that it may not adequately address the arguments of those who value other moral aspects or actions. Critics argue that Kohlberg's stages are culturally biased, that the highest stages in particular reflect a westernized ideal of justice based on individualistic thought. This is biased against those that live in non-Western societies that place less emphasis on individualism. Another criticism is that people frequently demonstrate significant inconsistency in their moral judgments. This often occurs in moral dilemmas involving drinking and driving or business situations where participants have been shown to reason at a lower developmental stage, typically using more self-interest driven reasoning than authority and social obedience driven reasoning. Critics argue that Kohlberg's theory cannot account for such inconsistencies. Friendships, especially same-gender friendships, are common during middle childhood. Friends serve as classmates, fellow adventurers, confidants, sounding boards. They also help each other to develop self-esteem and a sense of competency in the social world. As boys and girls progress through middle childhood, their peer relationships take on greater importance. For example, older children are likely to enjoy group activities such as skating, riding bikes, playing house, and building forts. Peer relationships may also cause the development of concerns and worries over popularity and conformity. As with same-age peers, friendships in middle childhood are mostly based on similarities. The awareness of racial or other differences may not affect friendships. Intolerance for those children who are not similar leads to prejudice or negative perceptions about other groups of people. While peers and friends may reinforce prejudicial stereotypes, many children eventually become less rigid in their attitudes toward children from other backgrounds. Growing numbers of school students, boys and girls of all ages, are victimized by bullies. In a recent survey, 1/3 of students in grades 6 through 10 said that they were bullied in the past year. Victims of bullying are traumatized emotionally and somatically. Headaches, abdominal pain, sleeping problems, and depressions are all byproducts of bullying. Most of the young people who have engaged in mass murder at their schools have been victims of merciless bullying. Bullies target kids who are different, too large or too small for their age, too smart or not smart enough. Bullies victimize children with disabilities, shy and unpopular children. Increasingly, school personnel are being trained in methods to recognize and halt bullying. One important strategy to stop bullying involves teachers making sure that they themselves aren't being bullied. Teachers that have been singling out students with negative comments or sarcasm, this is an example of bullying. Children are even less likely to speak out about bullying teachers than they are about bullying peers. But one of the contributors to this is reports by a 4th grade teacher that a child was being bullied and developed intense school anxiety. Only when the student got the nerve to report the teacher to her mother did the mother learn that the teacher was a notorious bully. Cyberbullying is one type of bullying. Emotional bullying, physical bullying, racist bullying, sexual bullying, and verbal bullying. A recent longitudinal study of more than 6,000 children found that children who were the victims of peer bullying from 4 to 10 years of age were more likely to engage in suicidal ideations at 11.5 years of age. New bullying statistics released in 2010 were showing that bullying is still a problem among children and teens, but is taking on a different approach, with cyberbullying becoming more and more rampant in school and after school among teens and children. Social networking has provided an entirely new environment for bullying to take place. According to Bullying Statistics 2010, there are about 2.7 million students being bullied each year by about 2.1 million students taking on the role of the bully. The bullying statistics for 2010 revealed about 1 in 7 students in grades kindergarten through 12th grade is either a bully or has been a victim of bullying. All those numbers are a decade old. You can imagine this is still an ongoing problem that continues to grow. So these numbers since then have increased.